Hi everybody, thanks for joining us for the webinar, the Guide to Running a Community Bike Share. So it's 2 o'clock Eastern, so let's get started. So before we begin, here are a couple ground rules for the webinar. So this presentation is being recorded and it will be available after the call. We'll send an email out to everybody with a link to watch the recording. Please use the Q&A tool, the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel. Please use that throughout the webinar to ask any questions you have throughout the presentation. We have reserved time at the end of the workshop for Q&A. So just meanwhile, throughout the presentation, just drop your questions there and we will get to them at the end. And then if you have any additional questions or comments, drop us a line at hello@zagster.com. And we have with us Tracy Rathbone from Town Center Community Improvement District, who's joining us. So if you have any questions for her as well, here's her email, tracy@towncentercid.com. So we have 4 main parts today that we're going to go over. The first is an overview of Zagster and the Town Center Community Improvement District. Then we'll talk about the 7 steps to running a bike share. Next, we'll go into a case study with Town Center Community Improvement District in Kennesaw, Georgia. And then we'll talk about how Zagster helps bring bike shares to communities. So Zagster is the nation's largest and fastest growing bike share provider. We work with cities, universities, businesses, and properties to solve their unique transportation needs. We currently have logged over 450,000 rides with over 75,000 riders across the United States and Canada. Here are a few of our city and community partners. So we have Carmel, Indiana, College Park, Maryland, Westfield, Indiana, Fort Collins, Colorado, really across the country. And some of our university partners include University of Maryland, Purdue University, The Ohio State University, and many more. And here's a map of all of our stations across the country. So I will let Tracy Rathbone join and or hop in and give a little introduction to her and her role at Town Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Shannon, so much for asking me to participate in today's webinar. Like Shannon said, my name is Tracy Rathbone. I'm the Executive Director of the Town Center Community Improvement District. We are a business district 20 miles north of downtown Atlanta, and we work with commercial property owners who voluntarily provide an additional property tax to the district, and we leverage that for infrastructure projects, trail, green space, and projects like our Zagster Town Center Bike Share program. So excited to be a part of today's session.
Great, thanks, Tracy. Cool, so let's get right into it. To start off, here's an outline of the 7 steps to community bike sharing that we'll cover today. So we're going to cover all of this in more detail as we go, but here is a checklist. If you download these slides, then you have them as a resource. So the first part is defining your vision. Why do you want bike sharing in your community? Think about what you're trying to achieve and what KPIs you can measure to determine whether or not bike share is helping you achieve those goals. For example, you could be trying to reduce traffic congestion, in which case you could measure travel times on certain roads before and after bike share. So an example of this is in New York City. They installed bike lanes on Columbus Avenue in 2011. And according to the city, the average car took about 4.5 minutes to go from 96th to 77th Street before the bike lanes were installed, and then 3 minutes afterwards. So the time decreased 35%, so you can see how they reduced traffic congestion. That's the way that they measured that. I won't run through all of these goals and KPIs because there's a lot there, and there might be some on here that you're thinking about, but that's just an example of one. So when you're planning the system, make sure you're set up the rider experience to achieve those goals that you've set. So you're going to need enough bikes, and they need to be accessible to riders. That means stations that are placed in convenient locations, and pricing needs to be reasonable. Make sure the bikes can be used in the format you plan for, too. So multimodal connections, do you want to allow for recreational trips, things like that. And don't forget also about accessibility and physical equity. So in other words, providing alternative bicycles to ensure community members of all physical capabilities are able to use the system. So this is an important issue. Many bike shares are struggling to provide these bikes in a user-friendly way, and even to provide them at all. So now let's focus on the actual bikes and stations. There are a few different types of systems, and there's really only two that make practical sense for a city. But just to give a full overview of the landscape, we'll talk about all of them. So first, a bike library, different than bike share because they allow for longer rental times and they lack automation. So the downside of that being that limited hours, limited use cases, and no point A to point B trips. It's more of a bike rental than a bike share. Ad hoc systems are free-floating, and there's a lack of management and accountability with those systems. So just bikes floating around, anybody can pick them up and drop them off whenever they want. Kiosk systems are relatively expensive, and they're the big city standard. They're mostly tailored to commuting and tourism for short, quick trips that last about 30 minutes. And the flexible bike sharing model is better suited to smaller communities because they're less expensive to build and operate, and they allow for more versatile use cases. These systems are perfect for connecting parts of a downtown area, but also suitable for making trips along a trail system. So flexible bike shares work really well with lower density communities. In fact, 90% of all U.S. cities with flexible bike shares have under 500,000 residents. So the old standard for setting bike share stations was to have one every 300 meters. And it's not necessary for communities who are implementing a flexible bike share system. So you'll still need to estimate ridership for the area you'd like to cover to determine how many bikes you'll need and where stations will go. So you can do this a few ways. A full feasibility study can get you this information. You can also generate a baseline projection using an estimate of uptake rate, which is essentially an assumption of the percentage of people within your desired coverage area who will become riders. So actually listed in the resources in this webinar, you'll find a section where you can download 5 pieces of content, one of which is our latest piece of content called The Guide to Running a Small City Bike Share. So this has really accompanies this webinar, but it has a lot more detail. So I encourage everybody to check it out, and it has more information about setting stations. But the one most important piece to take away from this is that when you're beginning a new program, you need to start with a fleet that's adequately sized to meet your goals. Always going back to those goals. So when you're coming up with where you'll place stations, keep in mind that stations should be placed to serve the use cases you've identified and to maximize potential impact towards your goals. So 2 examples would be one, placing bikes in transit deserts so that you can offer greater mobility equity. And then another example is placing bike stations along trails to encourage recreational use. But it's really important to make sure that your station is visible and reachable. So once you've figured out the general areas where you'd like stations to be, you will have to analyze the physical locations to determine where stations can actually fit. So NACDO has a really helpful guide. They have 5 rules for bike share station siting. So I encourage everybody to check it out. I can include it in the email that we follow up for everybody to have as a resource. What they say is that stations must be safe and convenient for riders and staff, and they must also fit within the streetscape hierarchy. So, for example, bike share stations take precedence over bike racks, but not over fire hydrants. So these rules will help you determine how you configure stations. You can place stations on the sidewalks, on medians, road level corrals. There are a lot of different ways, and again, I encourage you to check out NACDO's guide. It's a really good reference for a comprehensive list of options. So next, infrastructure. This question comes up all the time. Which comes first, the bike share or the bike lanes? We think that this doesn't need to be a chicken or egg situation. The 2 biggest roadblocks to getting more people on bikes are safety and access to bikes. So both bike lanes and bike sharing influence mode shifts by addressing those problems, so there's really no right way to start. And there are many cases of bike shares going in without broad bike infrastructure and then spurring more infrastructure implementation as residents use the program. So Zagster's hometown of Cambridge, Massachusetts is a great example of this. In tandem with Boston, they launched Hubway, the bike share program, in 2011. And both cities then moved ahead with major infrastructure projects. And one of them, in Cambridge, was actually named the best new bike lane in the entire United States in 2015 by People for Bikes. So actually a lot of our coworkers have used that bike lane. So at the end of the day, whatever you do, getting community members on bikes is a really powerful first step. So now let's move on to costs and responsibilities. These vary depending on which of the 3 general business models you pursue. So there's a spectrum. In public programs, the government owns and operates the entire program, which includes all costs and staffing. In a public-private program, the government purchases the hardware and then outsources operations. So that can include another company or a nonprofit. And then finally, in the private model, a company owns and operates the entire program. But despite the moniker, these systems still work in collaboration and partnership with cities and universities to launch and manage the program. So this is a little bit different from the latest wave of bike sharing you may have heard of, where private companies come into a city with no notice and lock up bikes on public property. This creates a lot of legal and logistical problems. You may have seen this happen recently in San Francisco and Austin, where private companies tried to enter the market on their own, but they were shut down by the cities. And it's still uncertain how this model will be regulated or if it will even be permanent at all. So as we referenced before, there are different types of bike share programs and the costs for each vary. A kiosk system can cost about twice as much as a flexible bike share system. So obviously you have the capital costs, the visible aspects of bike sharing, the bikes, the stations, the parts, the software, all of that are make up the capital expenses. However, you need to ensure you have the financing and staffing lined up not only to launch the program, but also to make sure the program runs smoothly. So operational costs like marketing to make sure that you have riders, and maintenance to ensure your riders have functioning bikes to use. So for example, here's a lineup of Zagster bikes that are being stored for the winter. And speaking of winter, we know a lot about it here in Boston. Winterization prevents bikes from deteriorating during the harsh weather, And it's also a really good opportunity for mechanics to perform a full tune-up on the bikes. So even if you don't have harsh winter weather and you're not going to hibernate bikes, you'll still need to account for some kind of warehousing for your supply of parts and tools. Moving on to maintenance and repairs. Experienced mechanics must be available to regularly service bikes for routine maintenance issues. This ensures that each bike is safe and enjoyable to ride, and it keeps bikes available so your system isn't depleted. Rebalancing might also be required to make sure bikes are available at each station. There are a lot of different ways bikes can be transported from one state, like if you need to take them from a full station to a station that doesn't have any bikes, you can take them via van, cargo bikes, and in Paris they actually use a barge that takes bikes down the River Seine, which is another unique option. So all these components are really important, not only for rider safety, keeping the bike safe, the riders safe on bikes, but also for creating a positive public impression of the program. If you only have broken bikes, no bikes are available, people will turn off from the program and they're hard to win back. So when riders are using the system, they will be reaching out to you for support regarding hardware issues like flat tires, as well as account issues like signing up for a membership plan. So when you're figuring out customer service and rider support, you'll need to determine the range of support services that you provide. So think about how and when you're going to interact with riders. So you're going to offer 24/7 support or support time window. If you'll offer in-house support or outsource customer service, those are all things that you need to determine and set up when the program launches. So if you build it, will they ride? Of course, the most important part of your bike share are the riders. That's why it's important to set up effective rider communications for your program. Running marketing and educational programs so riders and potential riders use the bikes, use them correctly, and use them often. It's not just about knowing that the system exists, but also about being reminded to ride and feeling encouraged to ride. So this image shows a couple rack cards that Zagster provides to customers to promote the system to community members. You can see there's a way to download the app to join, and there's steps for how to check out a bike, call to action for more information. It's all really important to provide. So although studies show that bike sharing on a shared bike is the safest way to ride, unfortunately, accidents do happen. It's standard for bike share providers to offer liability protection. Typically, this is included in the sign-up flow for new riders, so they're required from the onset to agree to basic terms and conditions for using the service. You know the drill. It's with every service that you sign up for, you need to agree to something. So that's liability, and you might also opt to carry insurance against theft and destruction, like bikes parked in trees. So that word vandalism might create some trepidation, but we should note that even the best systems in the world, like Paris and New York, still encounter vandalism. But as bike sharing has matured, so Paris was one of the first bike share systems. It's massive. But as the bike sharing industry has matured, providers and operators have improved system security and rider accountability. So for example, the bike share program in Minneapolis, appropriately called Nice Ride, lost only 0.3% of bikes in their first year of running. So don't freak out about theft and vandalism. It happens, but probably not as much as you think. Also, when looking at different vendors, check to see if they provide regular system updates. Most providers require you to purchase hardware up front, but some, like Zagster, will upgrade bikes and technology when it's available. So, big question, how are you going to pay for all this? We broke this down to 3 main sources of funding. So the first being municipal funding. It's a line item in your budget if you can find it. There's also state and federal funding that you can source, so finding grants. And then there's also sponsorship. So these are private funds, and there's also an opportunity to get a lot of people in your community involved in sponsoring the program. A model of sponsorship that we see for a lot of Zagster programs is called collaborative sponsorship. So with the community bike share, everybody's a stakeholder. So this opens up a lot of opportunities for nonprofits, businesses, advocacy groups, universities, real estate companies, and more to support the program through sponsorship. With collaborative sponsorship, organizations can support a single station, so this creates less risk for the bike share program as a whole. And here are a few examples of some companies and organizations that are supporting bike share programs, Zagster bike share programs. So here's a snapshot, just a visualization of the sponsorship in Fort Collins, Colorado. So they have a Zagster system, and the city sponsored stations and then brought in 6 outside sponsors when they first launched. And then they've actually been growing and adding stations as more sponsors come on board. And then another example is in Lakeland, Florida. They actually did not have a city sponsorship. It was sponsored, they had 7 stations, 36 bikes, through collaborative sponsorship. And then for universities, there are also options for finding funding. So internally, we've seen a lot of Zagster systems creatively find support through different departments in the university. So everything from student life and transportation to campus recreation and auxiliary services. And then we've actually had university systems also find outside sponsorship, so federal state grants at University of Maryland, and then Purdue also had a corporate sponsor for their system. So now let's talk about developing a launch and marketing strategy. As I mentioned before, everyone can be a stakeholder in your community bike share. So it's important that everyone involved presents a unified and uniform message. So this coordination makes sure that you have control of the message. So you want to make sure that the correct information gets out about your program. And it also ensures that you have maximum amplification of your message. So when you bring together everyone's resources towards the same end, then you can really make a big impact and get the word out there about your program. So you have a lot of options for the medium. You can host a launch event, you can post on social media, getting press in local newspapers, and then of course you need to craft the message itself. So one of our partners in Rome, New York actually had a really successful launch. They had a lot of press and a lot of buzz about the launch. They made it to the local news, and they featured a community member named Bonnie at the launch event. She was able to ride a bike for the first time in years because of Zagster, and now she can enjoy the beautiful trail system there. So it was a really good, the launch was really successful because they were able to highlight a rider and show the impact that it has on the community. So once you get riders, you'll need to take care of them. So this means marketing. You need to run marketing campaigns to make sure people know about the system and They're reminded to use it through emails, push notifications, promo codes to get reduced rates for riding, and other reminders. We have a little snapshot of an example push notification. If you go with a service that is app-based, so flexible bike sharing is usually app-based, you can send APNs and push notifications to riders, just pinging them and reminding them about the system. And in an effective rider relations plan, that includes being available to promptly troubleshoot issues as they arise. So whether that's a question about billing, if it's a flat tire, or in a case of abuse or misuse, such as a bike not being properly returned to a station. So most misuse, though, is unintentional, and it can be prevented through rider education. So, for example, a well-intentioned rider may return a bike to a station, but accidentally lock it improperly. So you'll need to provide instructional materials like posters and videos to teach riders how to use the system and to make sure that this information is easily accessible. So we actually have a couple screenshots of a GIF that we provide showing people how to unlock a Zagster bike. So we make it really clear-cut, show a visual image to show the step-by-step guide. And this can be found on landing pages, which are also near our support and FAQ sections as well, so that's easily accessible for riders to contact Zagster if they need any support. So the final step on our checklist is to plan for the future. As you work towards the goals you set for the program, you should regularly review performance and identify opportunities to improve or grow your system. So collecting feedback through surveys, NPS, aka Net Promoter Scores, and trip data will give you the information that's necessary to grow or update the system to meet rider demand. So for example, if you get feedback from riders that they like to end their rides at a certain location, you can consider adding a station there. So here's a map of a proposed station plan for the Zagster program, which is launching in Rochester. So the different color pins highlight the stations planned for the phased expansion of the program. So anticipating the future will allow you to prepare for success and also respond to potential challenges. So from here, I'm also going to let Tracy take the mic and talk a little bit about her experience at managing a bike share at Town Center. So Town Center currently has a Zagster system with 20 bikes, 3 stations, and they've seen a ton of success with 6,000 members and over 14,000 trips logged. So Tracy, I will let you take it from here and talk about your experience.
Great, thanks Shannon. So Town Center looked at a variety of options beginning in January of 2015 for launching a bike share inside of our district. We have a 7-mile trail that runs east to west through our district that has about 11,000 visitors a month, and we knew that that trail was a key site for us in terms of launching a bike share. We also have a state university, Kennesaw State, with more than 35,000 students inside of our district boundaries, and so we knew we had a ready audience along with about 100,000 employees that come into the district a day. We looked at a variety of different options for choosing our bike share program, but we wanted something that was scalable, flexible, and affordable, and so that is why we chose Zagster. We did not go through a feasibility study process. Rather, we looked at feasibility studies that the City of Atlanta had recently completed and also procurement processes with other partners such as the City of Smyrna, and decided to go with Zagster in order to have the opportunity to expand it not only inside of our district but throughout the county and the region. So we officially launched our program in November of 2015. We had the good favor of a warm holiday season, and ridership exploded immediately. We have had, like Shannon said, since that time, more than 6,000 members join, and more than 14,000 trips. I think that number is right at 15,000 after I looked last night. We have received a variety of awards for the technology, but for us, in terms of our success with Zagster, it's really been all about the partnership. The Community Improvement District in Town Center is robust in terms of our work plan, but is small in terms of our staff. And so we needed a partner that could come in with us and do a lot of the things that we did not have the bandwidth or internal infrastructure in order to do ourselves. And so from a planning perspective, Zagster came and visited. We took a bus tour of the district and determined which locations along the trail would be most effective. And then we looked at what it would look like both immediately as a pilot program and long term. So the 20 bikes we put on the ground in 3 key locations are along the Noonday Creek Trail, but they are also in very visible spots throughout the district. One is at a trailhead on the east side of the district. One, which is a picture you're looking at now, is at the site of a future park we have planned of 42 acres adjacent to a mall in the district. And so it gets lots of visibility with visitors coming to the mall on a daily basis. And then we have our third site at a future home of Aviation Park, which is another pocket park we are getting ready to go to construction on at the end of general aviation runway inside the district. So we knew that this program would initially be used primarily for recreation, but it's part of our master plan long-term, starting within the next year, to transition it to a modality for transit. We're working with Kennesaw State University on expansion along their campus, as well as the surrounding cities, and what it would look like to use the bikes through our trail system, as well as through our bike lanes. We have some on-road and off-road bike lanes throughout the district, and we are planning a 7-mile loop in the heart of the district that will have full bike access. So our next marketing effort will be getting riders off the trails and onto the roads, and using it as an opportunity to go maybe from their office to lunch, or office to a retail destination, or from their apartment or their student housing on campus to get where they need to go to meet friends for lunch, or a fun gathering out. So a lot of what we will be focusing on in this next phase is exactly what Shannon was talking about, is the last mile of connectivity for our riders. It's been great working with Zagster. We've gone through the pilot phase of technology on the bikes, and have also been one of the first to have the new Bluetooth technology. With the locking system built into the back wheel of the bikes, we've been able to see an increase in security, as well as a decrease in our maintenance needs. So it's been a great opportunity to have the more modern Bluetooth app-enabled technology through the Zagster program. So we are looking at a full expansion of this within the next year, and funding it in a variety of ways. The Community Improvement District funded the initial 2-year program for the 20 bikes, and then our expansion will be multi-tiered approach to funding, where we will have private entities who are looking to have docking stations either on their site or nearby, whether that is office parks or retail or hospitality, hotel sites, sponsoring the program, as well as sponsors through our 501c3, the Town Center Community Alliance. The Alliance will serve as a philanthropic destination for people to give in a way where they can support the Alliance by directly supporting Zagster Bike Share. So we have a variety of diversified funding streams in order to do this next phase of expansion for the Town Center program.
Great, thank you, Tracy. That was great. Thanks for sharing that. So let's talk about getting rolling. So if you're not sure if bike share will work for your community, you have two options for gauging viability. So you can do a full-scale feasibility study, but if you are working with the flexible bike share model, if you're not buying the hardware up front, this allows communities to actually plan and launch a full-scale program quickly at a comparable cost to a feasibility study. So some of the benefits of that are that you'll be collecting real-life data because people will be actually using the bikes. You'll be proactive in achieving your goals, and you'll also be giving back to the community in the process. So something to consider if you're wondering if this would be a good fit. Think about the flexible bike share model and seeing if you can get bikes on the ground and get rolling. So Zagster, where we help. So Zagster is a full-service bike share solution provider. We offer everything needed to plan, launch, manage, and grow a bike share program. We can assist with finding funding and sponsorships within your community. We obviously provide the technology, so with the bikes, locks, stations, we're app-based, so that is provided as well. And then bikes are replaced on a regular schedule at no additional cost, so you're not investing in that hardware. We also provide the operations. So obviously we just talked for the last 30 minutes about everything that goes into that, and we're the experts. So maintenance, repairs, we have mechanics in the field that help with our Zagster systems to do regular maintenance, and if anything comes up, they are responsive to that. 24/7 rider supports, and of course liability coverage. We can also assist with planning. We have an in-house transportation planner who can look at your community and help determine the system design. And then we cover the installation and launch of your program as well. And then your marketing needs. We talked about how important it is for marketing and rider education. So a website about your system and PR and advertising as well. So there are a lot of prerequisites for getting it rolling for bike sharing, but once you have those details in order, again with flexible bike sharing and with Zagster, we can get rolling pretty quickly. So within 3 weeks we can get a program on the ground. And the best part is, people love Zagster bikes. So these are actually user-generated photos that we grabbed from Instagram, people taking selfies of themselves on bikes, putting puppies in bike baskets. Who doesn't love that? So people love riding bikes. That's the best part about it.